Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and today we're going to be looking at some pre-evolutions and actually analyzing which one's the best. Today we're specifically looking at Ralts, but I'm also going to go over some overall ideas that you want to have in a good pre-evolution. And so, first of all, what is a pre-evolution? For this case, we're looking, of course, at Ralts. It's a Pokemon that its primary purpose in a deck is to evolve into another Pokemon. This is loosely related to my design analysis series. Someone commented that, and I figured that that's a great idea. This isn't exactly that, though. This is just a video where I'm mostly looking at pre-evolutions and deciding which one's the best, the strongest, the one you want to use the most, and looking at what makes them good or not in terms of power level, not design. I plan on making a video on design philosophy about them later, but I thought this was a good video to kick it off. And so Ralts, you see here that I have some data from the audience I've gathered. I think like one person said the confused ray Ralts. Most people said memory skip Ralts, and a few said teleportation burst Ralts. And we'll get to those as well, and I'll talk about them. But first of all, what does this Ralts evolve into? If you know Pokemon, you know it evolves into Kirlia, Gardevoir, Gallade. There are these three that see competitive play and very serious play. They're all very good cards. Kirlia here, discard 1, draw 2 engine, quite good. And then the Gardevoir here just draws 2 for free, has an usable attack, can accelerate energy quite good. Gallade also here allowing you to search for supporters and another usable attack as well. And then you notice in the top right, or you might not notice, it's very small. I have Gardevoir EX, and this in Japanese because it hasn't been released here in the US or wherever else you're from. Pretty much the whole world except for Japan. No one has this card. So that's why we're not really going to be talking about it too much. It generally has similar synergies as the Gardevoir here, though. And the general idea is it's primarily there for the Kirlia, so that's what we're going to be focusing on. And of course, with the pre-evolution, you need to make sure it has synergy, if it can, with the evolutions after it. But then there's some other ideas that you need to consider other than synergy, because synergy is something important, but not something that shines through very much with the different Raltses. So what are the Raltses that we have access to here? There are 3, and then in the top right, we have a 4th one that does 30 for 2, and has 70 HP, stuff like that. Nothing too crazy. Theoretically, it could provide some value, but again, it's not out yet, so I don't think it makes a ton of sense to talk about. But generally, it's pretty similar to the one in the middle with similar stats generally. But first of all, you notice that they all have, 2 of them have 60 HP, one has 70. The 2 that have 60 both have a metal weakness, and then the one with 70 has a dark weakness and fighting resistance, which is a bit weird, not very common. But because it's multiple types in the video game, that translates to multiple weaknesses in the TCG based on just some strange things having to do with fairy versus psychic type. No, but that's not a big deal. You could argue which is worse. Probably the metal weakness is a little worse. Having a resistance is nice, but really you're often going to be getting one-shotted. And I guess metal weakness is a bit vulnerable to stuff like Dialga. Dark weakness, maybe Eternity. It doesn't matter too much, though. Some people might make a big deal about it, but as I said, it doesn't matter too much. But there are certainly some other factors that differentiate between them. Of course, as I said, the HP, you always want more HP. That's always a good thing. And then the other factors that differentiate them. First of all, they all have the 1 retreat cost. Some people think retreat cost is a really big deal, and we'll get to that, but they all have the same in this case. But so we see 3 different attacks, all for 1 psychic. The first 2 only do 10 damage, the ones that most people voted for. But I'll start with the first one, the one all the way to the right, which is Confused Ray. It was released in Chilling Rain, and it said your opponent's active is now confused. Certainly, that provides some value. It stops them from theoretically attacking for a turn or 2, and it's a pretty solid effect. And then the Ralts in the middle here, Teleportation Burst. It does 10 for 1 psychic, so actually doing some damage here, although Confusion can do damage if they choose to attack and fail. But Teleportation Burst doing actual damage here, doing only 10, though, for 1 psychic, not particularly amazing. And then you switch Ralts to your bench Pokemon, so that provides protection to Ralts, can pivot into something else that you'd rather have in the active. And then the 3rd Ralts, the newest Ralts. I guess these are in reverse chronological order, so it's a bit confusing here, but the Ralts with memory skip all the way to the left here. 10 damage. Choose when your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks during your opponent's next turn. That Pokemon cannot use that attack. So that's a That's kind of interesting. In some ways, very similar to Confusion, both of them stopping effects of attacks. So the outer two are actually very similar in effect, while the Teleportation Burst for Ralts is quite different, having different HP, stats, and just a very different style of card. But what are you looking for in a good pre-evolution here? So first of all, survivability. You want to be be able to survive a lot, and vulnerability. Obviously, you don't want to be vulnerable. Kind of the same thing. That touches a bit on retreat costs, but mostly having some sort of defensive attack, possibly, which arguably all three have, and then also more HP. So that's where you're looking at 70 HP over 60. And then a poke attack. This is a term that some people use. I'm not sure if this is the primary term for this type of attack, but an attack where you just do a small amount of damage. Because, I mean, you take a large amount of damage, but really you're not going to get that because they're just relatively weak Pokemon. So something that does a small amount of damage, particularly for a low energy cost, is nice. And that's where the 30 damage on that Ralts that isn't released yet could come into play, but it's not out yet, right? So we're not going to be talking about that, although the other ones do have some aspect of that. And then lastly, a utility attack, which is a bit vague, but pretty much an attack that provides some value other than damage, which is pretty much anything. Pretty much all attacks, or not all attacks, but quite a few attacks do that. And pre-evolutions, because you're not using them for their damage, their utility value can become really important. So let's look at the first category, though. Survivability and vulnerability. Again, they all have the same retreat costs, different weaknesses, resistances. We don't need to debate that too much, though I would say that the Dark Weak Psychic Fighting Resistance one in the middle here is a bit better for survivability. And then, looking at all three of their attacks, the outer two can stop your opponent from attacking, kind of, but not a ton. You're really looking at Teleportation Burst here, and this is really, really good. Some people don't think it's very good, but it's nice because it allows you to switch out. You also preserve that energy if you want that. You could make an argument, though, that you can always retreat out, so it's not necessarily super valuable. But being able to use Teleportation Burst, it also does a little bit of damage. It's not a bad attack by any means. It allows you to have the Ralts as a pivot option later in the game. So being able to get out of the active with something like this and also theoretically do damage and pivot into possibly another Pokemon that you really want in the active, something like Galarian Weezing, Miltank, some type of wall. Ralts provides a lot of value in that aspect, the one with Teleportation Burst from Astral Radiance. I didn't go over the CES, but from left to right, it's Silver Tempest, Astral Radiance, and Chilling Rain. But the one from Astral Radiance provides just a lot of value here and be able to survive, whereas the other two don't. They're just going to get KO'd. They also, the big issue here, I guess, is HP. And some people say more HP is like always better. That's not necessarily true. Of course, and this is kind of a silly answer, but like look at the circumstances. So you may be thinking that's always true. That's kind of a silly piece of advice. That's just like saying do the right thing, which is true. Do the right thing, but you want to have a Pokemon that survives hits in a meaningful way. Or if like say your Pokemon has 20 HP versus like 30 HP, or I guess no, that's not a good example. What if a Pokemon has like 500 HP or 490 HP? It doesn't really matter too much because that 10 damage is just such a small increment. But when you get to lower amounts, notably 60 and 70, it does make a serious difference because there are attacks that do 60 damage or 120 damage across two targets. In which case, 60 damage makes you pretty vulnerable. 70 damage, you're still vulnerable, especially because they can use something like Galarian Zigzagoon or something else to just add on a tiny bit more damage. But having that 10 more HP does matter because stuff like, notably, I imagine, some people are thinking of, especially when they bring this up, Sableye from Lost Origin, which does 12 damage counters across your board, can KO 2 Ralts with 60 HP, but with 70 HP Ralts, you're much more difficult to KO because now you need a Galarian Zigzagoon just to get the 1 KO. So a pretty big deal here, having the extra 10 HP. It doesn't make it miraculously better, though, and as I said, most people did not vote for this one. So, but it's certainly the most survivable and arguably the best because of that. Some people would say just providing survivability is always better because it's not in there. Like, none of these Pokemon are amazing. It only provides value when it's evolved, so you just want to make sure you can get to the evolution as quickly as possible. And the one that does that the best is the Ralts in the middle. But moving on to a poke style attack. So this is doing small amounts of damage for a cheap attack cost, something that your deck doesn't provide. And this is a bit hard to look at because we're looking at just the engine portion of the deck, the Ralts, Kirlia, Guard, part, and not the attacker. And of course, if the attacker is one of those Pokemon, then, well, that is the attacker. And then those are basics. So having a basic attacker is nice. Really, like, the middle one and the left one do damage. So this is why they're better. The Ralts on the right does no damage. So doing 10 damage for one is actually useful. Some people think it's not useful, but just being able to do some damage can be the difference between winning and losing. Keep in mind, they're all psychic energy. So if you're playing this as an engine and you're not playing any psychic energy, which isn't, it certainly happens. It's not super common, but it might happen. And certainly in other decks, like, it depends on the meta, but it's not crazy to see that you're playing this without psychic energy. Then you lose out on that option, and you lose out on some threat. So 10 damage, though, is not a lot. If we're just looking at the damage, it's not a lot, but it's something. It's the minimum amount that you can do while still doing damage, which can be very meaningful. Because one mentality, and this might be a bit weird to think about, but I as a control player, think about this a lot. If you do 10 damage forever, you're going to win. And if your opponent does nothing, and you're thinking, why would my opponent not do anything the whole game? Well, I don't know. If they're playing control, they might be trying to get something stuck in the active. If they get the Ralts with the Confuse Ray stuck in the active, they're under no threat because you can never KO them with Confuse Ray. You can KO them with Memory Skip or Teleportation Burst. Of course, Teleportation Burst forces you to the bench, so that's a bit of a weird thing as well. That's probably good, but in some sense it could be bad as well. But certainly Memory Skip, just being able to use 10, 10, 10 over and over and over. We're ignoring the effect of the attack here as well. That's more of a utility aspect, but certainly they both have solid utility. But then, like, you really want to have some ability to attack with one energy in most decks as well. So a lot of decks need like 2 energy attachments to do serious attacks, but having the ability to go in for one energy and do damage is actually very important. Sometimes you almost KO your opponent's Pokemon, but just come up 10 short, maybe 40 short, but then you do Choice Bell or Defiant Band. This is where the 10 damage actually becomes very meaningful, and the fact that not having that 10 damage can be a big detriment. Some decks, I play a lot of theme decks, and notably, I believe Unseen Depths. A lot of the Pokemon seem like there's some really good lines and some really bad lines. Notably, the Golduck line looks really bad, but it actually is one of the few lines, arguably the only line that can do damage relatively easily for only one energy. So that's why the 10 for 1 can be super important at certain times. And people just forget about that sometimes, but it can be very meaningful. So that being said, 10 for 1 is not that much, right? It's still not amazing. You're not going to play it for that. But it's something that makes the left and the middle significantly better than the one on the right. And I'm hoping this is the left and right are correct and not some weird flipping, but then you can't read the cards anyway. So yeah, pretty much what I'm getting at is you want to be able to do some damage and it provides some value. This is the least important though, specifically in this. There are certain Pokemon, like there's a Cinccino that does 30 for 1, which actually provides much more value, of course, than 10 for 1. 10 for 1 provides some value, and that's something that people forget. So remember that, but don't prioritize it, because really the big thing here, survivability or utility, in usually the form of an attack. I can't really think of any Pokemon that have utility in the form of an ability. But there are any pre-evolved Pokemon that have utility in the form of an ability. I thought of a few, but nothing too impactful, and certainly not in this case. They all just have utility attacks. And this is very important. This is the main thing that people judge these 3 specifically based on. The one on the left, Memory Skip, so you choose one of their attacks, they can't use it next turn. So when's this useful? If they have one Pokemon that only has one attack, it's so good, it can just win you games. Will that happen a lot? No, right? I recently played a control deck based around this. Ralts is okay, but it's not going to win you games. So if it won you games, it would clearly be the best. But as I said, many people, quite a few, didn't say this was the best. So that route certainly provides solid value, and you do some damage. So if they let you just do that forever, you're going to get the KO. Which could be good. It can be bad, but you can reduce that damage to 0 also if you want with double turbo energy, if you're trying to deck them out or something. Also looking at the Ralts in the middle here, Switching to the bench, as I said, that's just a survivability type thing. Sure, you could do hit and run into something like a Wheezing Mill Tank, some other wall. I can't really think of any other walls that are particularly good, but that Ralts provides some value there, but not a lot, right? It's there for survivability, not really for power. You could hit and run just to your like V star, V max, and then like soak up some damage, but then you're getting lots of damage on your main attacker and not providing much threat. So really, Teleportation Burst as a utility attack provides very little value. It's just there for survivability of your engine card, which isn't even always the priority. So your attacker, obviously, you could argue, is the hardier deck because it does reaches the goal of the deck. The engine part doesn't necessarily do that. So then the Ralts on the right, and as I said, the Ralts on the right and the Ralts on the left, the newest and the oldest, are very similar. Confused right here. And now this is very different, or this isn't very different, but it's different enough from Memory Skip that it deserves some talking about. And someone said that they commented on the poll, and if you don't see my polls, I'd recommend you, I believe, hit the bell. Subscribing might show them to you, but hitting the bell will definitely show them to you. I think I've had some issues with that, but that should hopefully show you there. And just like check my channel for new videos, and it's in the community tab to find the polls. And you can also comment. I really appreciate comments; they just mean a lot to interact with the audience. But confused right here, the person said that it won the game. It's because it provides it disrupts them, right? Confusion, it's a special condition. It lasts forever. They need to flip an attack to attack. Keep in mind, these are both effects of attacks, the Ralts on the left and on the right. So they can be evolved out of, and then they can just attack like normal. So what's the difference here? One, obviously, confusion is only 50% stopping. And this is something that scares people a lot. Both the person using confusion and being hit by confusion. People who are use confusion, they're very scared of people just flipping out of it and just attacking anyway. And the person who's attacking is afraid that they're just gonna fail their attack, which is bad. So people often become very afraid of confusion and play weirdly around it, when realistically you just shouldn't play. You shouldn't completely change your game plan because of confusion. And you shouldn't avoid the flip at all costs. So people are very risk averse in that sense, but confusion rate, it has value. It's certainly a solid threat, and if your opponent wants to just flip through it, they can try. And they'll get heads sometimes, and they'll get tails sometimes. And they might carry your Ralts, but carrying your Ralts isn't the end of the world. So you can confuse, and then you can attack them, and then they'll miss a bunch of attacks like every other attack. And then you provide value. And the important thing here, the confusion ray Ralts, now if they let their Pokemon stay confused, it provides value over multiple turns from one attack. Versus Memory Skip Ralts provides a threat just on one turn, only on their next turn. And then after that, you need to Memory Skip again. And then you're not making any progress in terms of damage, really, other than that 10, which is pretty meaningless. So that's actually very important to understand. People think Memory Skip, because it's guaranteed, is better. Of course, Memory Skip can also not do its job if your opponent is able to... Well, if they retreat or switch, that also breaks confusion, but it also breaks Memory Skip. But Memory Skip also doesn't work if they have multiple very good attacks. Sometimes people try to Memory Skip you, but you really have a bunch of options, and it's not very useful. So Memory Skip certainly provides a lot of value, though. It has a value as an attacker in a control style deck. Oh, sorry guys. I'm very tired right now. I do not know why I'm so tired, but I am. I might be getting sick. I'm all curled up in a blanket here too. But yeah, it's that time of year, getting into the winter. So that's fine though. Still happy to see some lovely blossoms on the Ralts cards, but I'm getting sidetracked. Pretty much the idea is that they're both similar value, but confusion provides value over multiple turns. People are, as I said, risk averse, but confused rate, honestly, most of the time, people will try to avoid flipping, as I said, every time. So they're going to retreat. They're going to switch out. They're going to burn resources to get out of confusion, which might not actually mean anything. And so all of a sudden, you force this big thing. And Memory Skip also forces the same thing, but confused rate, if they don't do it, it just provides more value over multiple turns, allowing for greater development. However, I'd still say the other routes is better. Probably, and most people say this because it's just is more consistent, reliable. Confuse rate does have a use. Realistically, they're almost the same though. So this gives in to, of course, the final thing that I'm sure you're all asking: what's the best one here, right? Many people said the one on the left. realistically, the one on the left and the one on the right are almost the same, right? They're very similarly designed, different attacks, but surprisingly similar, versus the one in the middle. And honestly, this is going to be interesting. I'm going to say it's a split. So this is one of the controversial things. I remember I had a deck, and I had like a 3-1 split of a Reap, and I gave it to someone, one of my friends, and they were like, this is absurd. Like, why is there like a 1-3 split of Mareep? They don't even have any special attacks. And I'm like, oh, it's because survivability, but then retreat cost. And it's like, what's going on here? But it's really interesting that they provide different values. I'd probably put one memory skip and then, or no, I'd put more memory skip. See, I didn't actually plan this, in case you couldn't tell from me ranting the whole time. Memory skip provides probably more value. Teleportation burst, those are very nice. So you want to split memory skip or confused ray. You can do whichever you prefer. Most people, as I said, prefer memory skip. Confused ray is about as good though. And then you're going to be looking at certainly, I'd say one of those. Memory skip can provide guaranteed very strong value if you're able to punish your opponent in that aggressive control push. That's a bit of a weird oxymoron, but certainly that can provide serious value, or the confused ray. And then one of those to kind of lock down your opponent if they're doing something tricky, but then a bunch of teleportation burst Ralts, because greater HP, greater tankiness, it's just better, right? Like, you want to get to your Kirlia, and that's really an important thing. Even though memory skip and confuse ray are very, very solid attacks, are they really providing enough value that it's worth sacrificing our Ralts in order to, like, not draw well for the rest of the game? No, like, get up your Kirlia, right? It's very important. Memory skip Ralts is good. It's a very solid card. But yeah, play 3. If you're playing at 4 of them, play 3 teleportation burst, 1 memory skip. That's probably how I'd recommend it. Of course, if you're doing a Ralts attacking deck, obviously play memory skip Ralts or whatever. But yeah, go do the split right. This is one of the rare cases where the split's right. I've seen like absurd splits. And this is where you just get too big brain that it's actually small brain. But yeah, go for splits on this one. I hope that answers your questions. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this different. It's a bit of a different style of video. I'm just kind of like talking, but yeah, I wanted to make a video. I'm doing daily videos. I hope you enjoyed though. If you did, I really appreciate if you like and subscribe, comment. As I said, commenting really means a lot to me. If you've gotten this far, I'd really love to. I'd love to know if you've gotten this far. Listening. I don't know if anyone is, but it'd be cool to know if you are. And of course, other video ideas. I'm interested in hearing what you're looking for. I've got some coming, obviously. Check out the community tab as well. So as I'm really loving that, and I think you guys are too. I'm getting like votes, which is really great. But I hope you enjoyed. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video. See ya.